morning air was cold and sharp when 16-year-old Emma watched her mother from the person who had arrived 3 days earlier. Burgundy wool sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, creating dancing patterns on the flowered sewn along the collar. For the first time gift from Emma's grandmother Emma woke up without the heavy weight that had been sitting on her chest like a stone. Watching every movement her mother realized she could breathe
Grace's
fully
fingers
again.
moved slowly
She lay in
over the
bed for a
soft
few
wool,
extra minutes
as if she was
just trying to
enjoying this
memorize
new
how it
feeling of
felt.
lightness.
The coat was as if someone had been pressing down on her shoulders for 2 years.
Emma had always admired how
that
elegant
pressure
her
was
mother looked
completely
when she
gone.
wore it to church
Emma
on
felt like
Sundays.
she could float up to
"Why
the
are you
ceiling if she
packing your
wanted
best
to."
coat, Mum?
After breakfast
Emma
with
asked,
Margaret,
her voice
Emma
quiet with
decided to
worry.
take a long walk
Grace
through
stopped
Bath's
folding and
beautiful
looked at her
streets.
eldest daughter.
She had avoided
Her eyes
walking
were
around
red
the town
from
during
crying
the
the
previous
night before,
visits
though
because
she tried
everything
to hide it.
reminded her of painful
Grace's
memories
hands
with
trembled
James.
slightly as she
But
smoothed
today
the
she
coat
wanted
one
to see
last
her
time before
hometown with
placing it
fresh
carefully
eyes.
in the suitcase.
She walked past the
"I have to
Roman
go to
baths
London,
where she
Love.
had taken school
There's
trips
work
as
at
a
the
child.
textile factory
She
there.
strolled through the
Your
Royal
father's
Crescent,
back injury means he
admiring
can't
the
work
elegant
anymore,
curved
and
row
we
of
need the
Georgian
money.
houses that looked
Emma
like
felt her
something
world
from a fairy
tilting
tale.
sideways.
She wandered
She knew
through the
things
small
had been
streets
difficult
lined
since
with
her father
honey-colored
hurt his
stone
back in the
buildings and
mining
shops
accident
selling
3
everything
months
from
ago.
books to
The
handmade
doctor
chocolates.
said he might never be
Everything
able to
looked
do
the
heavy
same as
work
it
again.
always had, but
Emma
Emma
had
had
hoped
hoped
they would find another way.
Instead of
She had
painful
hoped her
memories,
mother
she
would
saw
not have to
beauty.
leave.
Instead
She
of
thought
places
about her
that
3
reminded
younger
her of her
brothers
failed
sleeping in the
marriage,
next room.
she saw the
Tom
town
was
where
8
she had
years
grown
old
up
and
and tried
learned
to act
dream.
grown up. The
But he
streets
still
that had
cried
once
when he
made her
thought nobody
sad
was
now
watching.
filled her with a gentle
Jack was 6
nostalgia
and
for
had
her
become very
childhood and
quiet
hope
since
for her
father's
future.
accident.
Emma stopped
Little
at a
William
small
was only
cafe
4
where she
and
did
did
not
Margaret used
understand
to
why
have tea
Daddy
when she
could
was
not
young.
play with him anymore.
She ordered a cup of
How
Earl
long will
Grey
you
and
be
a slice
gone?
of lemon cake.
Emma asked,
sitting
though
by
she
the
was
window
afraid
and
to
watching
hear the
people
answer.
walk by.
I don't know,
Families
sweetheart.
with small children,
Maybe 6
elderly
months,
couples
maybe
holding
longer.
hands.
Young
It depends
people
on how
laughing
quickly
together.
I can save enough
Everyone
money.
seemed to be living their
Emma's
own
heart
story,
felt heavy,
dealing with their
6
own
months
joys
seemed
and
like
challenges.
forever.
When
She would
Emma
have to
returned
take
to
care of her
Margaret's
brothers,
cottage for
help her
lunch,
father with
her
his
aunt
pain,
looked up from
keep the
stirring
house
soup
clean,
on the
and make
stove
sure
and
everyone
smiled
had
with
enough to
surprise.
eat.
The
"You look completely
responsibility
different,
felt
dear,"
enormous for
Margaret
someone who
said,
had just turned
setting down her
16.
wooden spoon.
Grace finished
Younger
packing and
somehow.
closed the suitcase
Like a
with
weight
a
has
soft
been
click.
lifted from your shoulders.
She sat down next to
Emma
Emma
sat
on the
down
bed
at the
and pulled
kitchen
her
table
close.
and accepted a
I know
bowl
this
of
is hard,
Margaret's
Emma.
delicious
I know
vegetable
you're
soup.
scared,
But
I
you're
feel
stronger
different,
than you
Aunt
think.
Margaret. You've
I feel
always been my
free.
little helper.
I know it sounds
and now
strange,
I need
but
you
I
to
feel
be
like
even
I can
braver.
finally breathe properly
Emma nodded,
again.
though tears were
Margaret
starting
nodded
to form in
knowingly.
her eyes.
Forgiveness
She
does
wanted
that
to
to
be
a
brave
person.
for her mother.
When we hold
but
on to
inside
anger
she
and
felt like a
hurt,
scared
it
little
becomes
girl.
like carrying a
At
heavy
the train
bag everywhere
station,
we go.
Grace wore the
We
burgundy
get so
coat.
used to the weight that
It
we
made her
forget
look
what it
strong
feels
and
like to walk
dignified.
without it.
Even though Emma
They
could
ate
see the
lunch
sadness
together,
in her mother's
talking
eyes.
about Emma's
The
childhood
coat
memories
seemed to
and
wrap
Margaret's
around
garden
Grace like a
plans for the
shield of
spring.
courage.
It was
The
peaceful
golden
and
threads
normal,
on the collar
and
caught
Emma
the
realized
early
she had
morning
not
sunlight
felt
and
this
seemed to
relaxed
glow.
in years. Other people
That
at the
afternoon,
station were saying
Emma packed
goodbye
her
to their
small
loved ones
suitcase
too.
and prepared to drive
Emma
back
noticed
to
several
London.
women wearing
She
their
hugged
best
Margaret
clothes,
goodbye,
probably
promising
heading
to
to the
visit
city
again
for work
soon,
just like her
but
mother.
this time just for
The
the joy of
economic
spending
troubles
time
had
together
affected
rather
many
than to heal
families
from
in their
pain.
small village.
The drive back
Emma's
to
father
London
had
was
come to the
completely
station
different
despite
from
his
anxious
back journey
pain.
3 days earlier.
He leaned heavily
Emma
on his
played
walking
music she
stick and
enjoyed and
spoke
sang along
quietly
with the
Grace.
radio.
Emma's
She
three
felt
brothers
excited
stood
about
close
returning
together,
to her life
not
instead of
fully
dreading
understanding what was
About
happening, but
halfway
sensing
home,
the
she saw a
sadness in the
sign
air.
for a scenic
"I'll
viewpoint
write to
and
you every
decided
week,"
to stop.
Grace
The
promised,
viewpoint
holding Emma
overlooked
close
rolling
one more
green
time.
hills dotted with
"And I'll
sheep
come
and
back
small
as soon as I've
farmhouses.
saved enough money
A
for
wooden
us to be
bench sat
comfortable
at the
again."
edge of the parking
Emma
area,
breathed in her
facing
mother's
the familiar
familiar
scent
countryside.
lavender soap and
Emma
the
sat
faint
down
smell
and
of the
took in
bread
the
she had
peaceful
baked that
view,
morning.
feeling
She
grateful
wanted
for
to
this
remember
moment of
everything
quiet
about
beauty.
this moment.
As she
The
sat
train
there,
whistle
Emma
blew
looked down at
loudly,
her left hand,
echoing across the
She was still
platform.
wearing her wedding
Grace
ring,
kissed each of her
even though she
children
had
and
been
hugged her
divorced for
husband.
2 years.
Then she picked
She
up
had
her
kept
small
wearing it
suitcase
partly
and
out of
walked toward the
habit,
train,
but mostly because
her
taking
burgundy
it
coat
off felt
stood
like
out
admitting
among
that
all the
part of her
dark
life
clothes
was
of the
truly
other
over.
passengers.
Now,
Grace
sitting on
stepped
this
onto the
bench
train and
overlooking
found
the
a window
English
seat.
countryside,
She
Emma
waved to her
slowly
family
slipped
as
the
the
ring off
train
her
began
finger.
to move. She did not
Emma
feel
ran
angry or
alongside
sad
the
as she
train
did
for a
it.
few steps.
steps.
Instead,
watching
she felt
her mother's
peaceful
face
and
in the
ready
window.
to let go of the
The
past
burgundy
completely.
coat was the last thing
She held
Emma
the
could
ring
see
in her
clearly
palm
as
for
the
a
train
moment,
picked up speed.
remembering the hope she
Emma
had felt
watched
when
until
James
the train
first
was
put
just
it on
a
her
dot
finger
on the
5 years
horizon.
ago.
Even
Then
after
Emma
it
put the ring
disappeared
in her
completely,
purse,
she
not to
stood
throw
there
it
looking
away,
down the
but
empty
to keep it
tracks.
as a reminder
That
of a
night,
chapter
as
of her
Emma
life
tucked
that
her
was
little
now
brothers
closed.
into bed and
She was
listened to their
finally ready
questions
to
about
start
when
writing
Mummy
new
would come
chapters.
home.
She
When
thought
Emma
about the
arrived
burgundy
back at her
coat.
London flat
In
that
her
evening,
mind, she could see
found
her
several
mother wearing
messages
it in
on
the
her
big
phone.
city, looking
One of them
strong
made her
and
heart
dignified
skip
even
with
among
excitement.
strangers.
It was from
That coat
Thornton
became
Design
Emma's
Agency,
hope. One
every
of the most
night,
prestigious
she would close her
design
eyes
firms
and
in
imagine
London.
seeing that
Emma had
burgundy
dreamed
coat
of working
walking
there
back
for
up their
years,
small
but never
village
thought
road.
she was good enough
In
to
her
apply.
dreams, her mother
The
would be
message said they
smiling
had
and
seen some
carrying
of
a
her
bag
work
full of
online
money
and wanted to
ready
offer
to make
her a
everything
position
better
as a
again.
senior graphic
The coat
designer.
was more than just
The
clothing.
salary was more
It
than
was
she
a
had
symbol
ever
of her
imagined
mother's
earning,
love, her
and the projects
sacrifice,
they
and
described
her promise
sounded
to
exactly
return
like
home.
the kind of creative work she had always wanted to do. Emma stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure it was real. Then she looked across her flat at James's wedding invitation, still sitting on her desk where she had left it a week ago. She walked over and picked it up, smiling as she read his handwritten note again. That invitation, which had seemed like such a painful thing when it arrived, had given her the greatest gift imaginable. It had forced her to face her past, forgive the hurt, and finally set herself free to embrace her future. Emma opened her laptop and began typing her acceptance letter to Thornton Design Agency. For the first time in years, her heart was wide open to all the beautiful possibilities that lay ahead. The end. Winter came early that year, bringing with it a coldness that seemed to settle not just in the air, but deep into Emma's bones. The first snow fell in October, covering their small cottage and the village beyond in a blanket of white that looked beautiful but made everything harder. Emma stood in the kitchen before dawn, trying to light the fire in their old stove. Her hands were stiff from the cold and the matches kept going out. She had watched her mother do this hundreds of times, but it was much harder than it looked. Finally, a small flame caught, and Emma carefully fed it with the precious pieces of coal they had left. She had learned to cook simple meals over the past month since her mother left. Porridge for breakfast, soup made from vegetables from their small garden, and bread when they could afford flour. The meals were not as good as her mother's cooking, but they filled their stomachs. Her father spent most days in bed now. The cold weather made his back pain much worse. Emma would bring him tea and the medicine the doctor had given them, though there was not much left of it. Sometimes she would sit with him and read aloud from the newspaper, though most of the news was sad these days. "You're doing so well, Emma," her father would tell her, but she could see the worry in his eyes. He felt guilty that his 16-year-old daughter had to take care of everyone. Letters from her mother came every few weeks, arriving on different days so Emma never knew when to expect them. She would recognize her mother's handwriting on the envelope and feel her heart jump with excitement. Grace wrote about the long hours at the textile factory, starting work at 6 in the morning and not finishing until 8 at night. She described the tiny room she shared with 2 other women, barely big enough for 3 beds and a small table. But Grace also wrote about the money she was saving, pound by pound. Every week, she put aside what she could after paying for her room and food. "I'm getting closer to coming home," she would write. "Each day brings us closer together." Emma would write back immediately, telling her mother about her brothers, about father's health, about the small things that happened in their village. "I think of you wearing that coat," Emma wrote in one letter. "It makes me feel like you're still strong even when things are hard." The hardest part of each day was bedtime. That was when her brothers missed their mother the most. Tom, who was 8, tried to be brave and help with little William. He would read stories to his youngest brother and help him get dressed in the mornings. But Emma sometimes caught Tom crying quietly in his bed when he thought nobody was looking. Jack, who was 6, had become very quiet and serious since their mother left. He used to laugh and play with his brothers, but now he spent most of his time sitting by the window or following Emma around the house. He was too serious for a 6-year-old boy and it worried Emma. Little William was the hardest to comfort. At 4 years old, he did not understand why his mother had gone away. Every evening, he would stand by the front window, pressing his face against the cold glass and ask, "When is Mummy coming home?" Emma never knew what to say. She could not promise it would be soon because she did not know. Emma's own dreams seemed very far away now. Before her mother left, Emma had planned to finish school and perhaps become a teacher. She loved reading and learning new things. But now her days were filled with washing clothes in cold water, preparing meals with whatever food they had, and making sure the house stayed warm with the little coal they could afford. The washing was the worst job. Emma had to heat water on the stove, scrub the clothes by hand, and then hang them outside to dry. In winter, the clothes would freeze on the line and she had to bring them inside stiff as boards to finish drying by the fire. But every evening, no matter how tired she was, Emma would look out the window toward the road that led to the train station. She would imagine seeing that burgundy coat walking up their small village road, getting bigger and clearer as her mother came closer to home. It became her prayer, her hope, her strength during the darkest moments. One particularly cold night in December, as thick snow fell outside their small cottage, Emma could not sleep. The wind was howling around the house, and she could hear her brothers coughing in the next room. She got up and wrapped herself in one of her mother's old shawls that still smelled faintly of lavender. Standing by the window watching the snow swirl in the darkness, Emma felt the same warmth she remembered from her mother's hugs. The shawl seemed to carry her mother's love across all the miles between them. "Soon," she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the cold window. "Soon Mum will come home." In the distance she could almost see that burgundy coat walking through the snow, bringing love and hope back to their little family. 2 years
came
had
early
passed
that
since
year,
Grace left
bringing
for
with it
London.
a coldness that
Emma
seemed
was
to
now
settle
18,
not just in the air,
and the
but
responsibility
deep
of
into Emma's
caring for her
bones.
family had
The
become
first
as
snow
natural
fell
to
in
her as
October,
breathing, covering their
her
small
brothers had
cottage
grown
in the
too.
village beyond
Tom
in
was
a
10 and
blanket
helped
of white
more
that
around the
looked
house.
beautiful but
Jack
made
was 8
everything
and had
harder.
started to smile
Emma
again,
stood in the kitchen
and William
before
was 6
dawn,
and no
trying
longer
to light
stood
the
by the
fire in
window
their
every
old
evening
stove.
asking for
Her
his
hands
mother.
were stiff from
Emma
the
had
cold,
learned to
and the
manage
matches
their
kept
small
going
household
out.
with careful
She had
planning.
watched her mother do
She
this
grew
hundreds of
vegetables in
times,
their garden
but it was
during the
much
summer,
harder than it looked.
preserved what she could for
Finally,
winter,
a small
and had
flame
even
caught,
started taking
and
in
Emma
sewing
carefully
work from
fed it
neighbors
with
to
the
earn a
precious
few
pieces
extra
of coal they
coins.
had left.
Her father's
She had
back
learned
had
to cook
improved
simple
enough that he
meals
could
over
do
the
light
past
work
month
around the
since her
house,
mother left.
though he still could
Porridge
not
for
return to his
breakfast,
old job.
soup made from
The letters
vegetables
from Grace
their
came
small
regularly,
garden,
and
always
bread
with
when they
news
could
about
afford
the
flour.
money she was saving
The
and
meals were not
promises
as
that she
good
would
as her
come
mother's
home soon.
cooking, but they
Emma
filled
kept
their
every
stomachs.
letter tied with a
Her
ribbon
father
and a
spent
box
most
under
days
her
in
bed
bed
now.
Reading
The
them
cold
again
weather
on
made his
difficult
back
days
pain
gave
much
her
worse.
strength.
Emma
It was a
would bring
Tuesday
him
morning
tea
in
and the
March when
medicine
the
the doctor
telegram
had
arrived.
given them,
The
though there was
postman
not
knocked
much
on their
left of
door
it.
with an unusual
Sometimes
urgency,
she would sit with him and
holding
read
a
aloud
yellow
from the
envelope
newspaper,
that made Emma's
though
stomach
most of the
drop.
news was sad
Telegrams
these days.
only came with
"You're doing
important
so
news,
well,
and
Emma,"
important news
her
was
father
rarely
would tell
good
her,
news. But she could
Emma's
see the
hand
worry in
shook
his
as
eyes.
she read the words printed in
He
black
felt
letters.
guilty that his
Grace
16-year-old
Thompson.
daughter had to
Stop.
take care of
Ill
everyone.
with fever.
Letters
Stop.
from her mother
Lost
came
job.
every few weeks,
Stop.
arriving
Cannot
on
afford
different
medicine
days,
or
so
travel.
Emma never knew when
Stop.
to expect them.
Help needed.
She would
Stop.
recognize her mother's
Emma
handwriting
stared
on
at
the
the
yellow
envelope
paper
and
until
feel
her
her
words
heart
blurred
jump with
together.
excitement.
She read
Grace
it again,
wrote about the
hoping
long
she had
hours at the
misunderstood,
textile
but the
factory,
message was
starting
clear.
work at 6
Her
in the
mother
morning
was sick
and not
stranded
finishing
in
until
London
8
with
at
no
night.
money to come home.
She described the
Emma's
tiny room
father
she
was
shared
in the
with
garden
2 other
when she
women,
found him,
barely big
when
enough
she showed
for
him
3
the
beds and a
telegram.
small
His
table.
face went pale,
But
and
Grace
he sat
also
down
wrote
heavily
about
on
the
an
money
old
she was
wooden
saving,
crate, pound by
"We have to
pound.
help her,"
Every
Emma
week,
said,
she
though
put
she had
aside
no
what she
idea
could
how they
after
could
paying
manage
for her
it.
room and
They
food.
barely had enough
"I'm
money
getting
for their
closer
own
to
food
coming
and
home,"
coal, she would
That
write.
evening, after her
Each day
brothers had
brings
gone
us
to
closer
bed,
together.
Emma walked through their
Emma would
small
write back
cottage
immediately,
looking at everything
telling
they
her
owned.
mother about her
There was
brothers,
not much
about
of value,
father's health,
some
about
dishes
the
that had
small
belonged
things
to
that
her
happened in their
grandmother,
village.
a few books,
"I
her
think of
mother's
you
sewing
wearing that
box.
coat,"
But
Emma
then she
wrote in
remembered
one
something.
letter.
It
"In the
makes me
corner
feel
of her
like you're
parents'
still
bedroom
strong
stood her
even when
father's
things are
violin
hard.
case,
The
covered
hardest
in
part of
dust.
each day was bedtime.
Emma opened it
That was when
carefully
her
and
brother
looked at the
missed their
beautiful
mother the
instrument
most.
inside.
Tom,
Her
who
father
was
had
8,
played
tried
it
to
when
be
he was
brave and
younger,
help with
before
little
work
William.
and worry had taken
He
up
would
all
read
his
stories
time.
to his
It
youngest
was the
brother
one
and
thing
help
of
him
real
get
value
dressed
they
in the
still
mornings.
Emma
But Emma
gathered the
sometimes
violin,
caught
her
Tom
school
crying
books,
quietly in
and
his
his
bed
small
when he thought
collection of
nobody
ribbons
was
and
looking.
jewelry, little
Jack,
treasures
who
she
was
had
6,
collected
had
over the
become
years.
very quiet and
Then she
serious
walked to
since
the
their
village
mother left.
center in the growing
He
darkness.
used to laugh and play with his
Mr.
brothers,
Davies, who
but
owned the
now
music
he spent
shop,
most of his
was
time
just
sitting by
closing
the
when
window
Emma
or
knocked on
following
his
Emma
door.
around the house. He looked
He was
surprised
too
to see
serious
her,
for a 6-year-old
especially when
boy
she
and
asked
worried
if he
Emma.
would buy her father's
Little
violin.
William was the hardest
"Are
to
you
comfort.
certain, Emma?
At 4
This
years
violin
old,
means
he did not
everything to your
understand
father.
why his mother had
I
gone
remember
away.
when he used to play
Every
it at the
evening,
village
he would
dances.
stand by the front
Emma's
window,
throat
pressing
felt
his
tight,
face
but
against
she
the
kept her
cold
voice
glass
steady.
and asked,
My
"When is
mother
Mummy
means
coming
everything
home?"
to all of us.
Emma never knew what to
Mr.
say.
Davies
She
examined
could
the
not
violin
promise it would be
carefully.
soon because she
It
did
was
not
old
know.
but well made.
Emma's
with a
own
rich,
dreams
warm
seemed
sound.
very far away now.
He offered Emma
Before
more
her
money
mother
than she
left,
had expected.
Emma had planned
Enough
to
for a
finish
train
school
ticket
and
to
perhaps
London
become a
and some
teacher.
extra for her
She
mother's
loved
medicine.
reading and learning new
She
things.
also sold her
But
school
now her
books to
days
the
were
teacher
filled with
who had
washing
always
clothes and
encouraged her
cold
to
water,
continue her education.
preparing meals with whatever
The woman
food they
looked
had,
sad as she
and
counted
making
out
sure
the
the house
coins,
stayed warm
knowing
with
this
the little
meant
coal
Emma
they
would
could
not be
afford.
returning to
The
school
washing was
anytime
the worst
soon.
job.
With
Emma
the money
had to
carefully
heap
tucked
water on the
into her
stove,
coat pocket,
scrub the
Emma
clothes
bought
by
a train
hand,
ticket
and
to
then
London.
hang them outside to
She
dry.
left early the
In
next
winter,
morning,
the clothes
telling
would
her
freeze
father
on the
and
line
brothers
and
that
she
she
had to
would bring
bring
their
their
mother
inside
home.
stiff as
The
boards
journey
to
took
finish
8
hours on a slow train that stopped at every small station, no matter how tired she was. Emma had never traveled the window toward the road that led to the train station. She watched the countryside. She would imagine through the train window, seeing places she had only heard about in stories, getting bigger and clearer. London was her mother came louder than Emma had ever imagined. It became her prayer. The streets were crowded with people and carriages, the darkest moments, and the air smelled of smoke. One particularly cold night in December, Emma asked directions several times before finding the hospital where her mother was staying. The wind was howling around the large, cold building, and she could hear her brother's coughing in the next room with footsteps. She got up and wrapped herself in one of her mother's old shawls that still smelled faintly of lavender. When Emma finally found her mother, standing by the window watching the snow swirl in the darkness, so small and pale in the narrow bed, warmth she remembered from when she had left home 2 years ago. The shawl seemed to carry her mother's love across all the miles now thin and worn from constant use. She whispered to herself, her shoulders like a blanket, the cold window. Even sick and poor, soon her mother had kept the coat with her. In the distance, she could almost see Grace that burgundy coat, her voice through the snow, filled with surprise, bringing love and hope back to their little family. With tears when she saw her daughter standing beside the bed. How did you get here? Emma sat down on the edge of the bed and took her mother's thin hand in both of hers. The same way you got to London, Mum. Because family takes care of family. Grace began to cry then, not from sadness but from relief and love. Emma noticed how carefully her mother had preserved the coat despite everything she had been through. Even in her illness, even with so little money, Grace had protected this symbol of their family's dignity and love. Emma brought her mother home on a warm spring day, supporting Grace's weak steps as they walked slowly from the train station to their cottage. The journey had been difficult for Grace, who was still recovering from her illness. She had to stop several times to rest, leaning heavily on Emma's strong young arm. When they reached home, Emma's father and brothers were waiting in the doorway. Little William, now 6 years old, ran to his mother but stopped short when he saw how thin and pale she looked. Tom and Jack hung back, suddenly shy after 2 years apart from their mother. Grace smiled through her tears as she hugged each of her sons. "Look how big you've all grown," she whispered, her voice still weak but filled with love. "I've missed you so much." Over the following weeks, Emma watched her mother slowly regain her strength. Grace spent most days resting in bed, drinking the herbal teas Emma prepared and eating small portions of soup. The doctor said she needed time to recover fully from the fever that had nearly killed her. Now 18, Emma knew she had to become the family's main provider. Her father helped as much as he could, but his back injury still limited what work he could do. The money Emma had earned from selling the violin and her belongings was almost gone, spent on medicine and train tickets. Emma remembered watching her mother sew when she was small. Grace had always been skilled with a needle, mending their clothes and making beautiful repairs that were almost invisible. Now, with her mother too weak to work, Emma decided to learn these skills herself. With her mother's guidance, Emma started taking in sewing work from neighbors. Mrs. Henderson from down the road brought a torn dress that needed mending. Mr. Foster asked if Emma could adjust his work trousers that had become too loose. Word began to spread that Grace Thompson's daughter was learning to sew. Emma's fingers were clumsy at first. She pricked herself with the needle many times, and her early stitches were uneven and loose. But Grace taught her patiently, guiding Emma's hands and showing her how to hold the fabric. "See how the thread follows the pattern?" Grace said one afternoon, her voice still weak but warm with encouragement. "Each stitch connects to the next, making something stronger than before." Day by day, Emma's sewing skills improved. She learned to mend torn work clothes so well that the repairs were nearly invisible. She could adjust dresses to fit better and even create simple garments like aprons and children's shirts. Her stitches became smaller and more even, her repairs more professional. The neighbors began to trust Emma with their better clothes. Mrs. Davies brought her Sunday dress to be altered. The pastor's wife asked Emma to mend her husband's good coat. Soon, Emma had more work than she could handle in the evenings after taking care of her family. Word spread through their village about Emma's careful work and fair prices. People said she had inherited her mother's gift with needle and thread. Emma felt proud when customers praised her work, but she always gave credit to her mother's patient teaching. As autumn arrived and the evenings grew longer, Emma and Grace would sit together by candlelight, working on their sewing projects. Grace's strength was returning slowly, and she could now help with simple tasks. It felt wonderful to Emma to work alongside her mother again after so many years apart. One evening in October, as they worked together in the warm glow of candles, Grace made a surprising suggestion. "Emma, would you help me with something special?" Grace asked, looking at the burgundy coat hanging on its peg by the door. Emma followed her mother's gaze to the coat that had meant so much to their family. It looked tired now, worn thin from 2 years of constant wear in London. But it was still beautiful, still precious. Together, they carefully removed the golden embroidered collar from the burgundy coat. Grace's fingers moved slowly but skillfully as she showed Emma how to take apart the delicate stitching without damaging the golden threads. "We're going to create something new," Grace explained. "Something that honors what this coat has been while making it ready for the future." For weeks, they worked together on their special project. Grace showed Emma how to create a new design that incorporated both their sewing styles. Emma's stitches were neat and practical, while Grace added decorative touches that made the work beautiful. They reinforced the worn areas of the coat with new fabric, but in a way that looked intentional rather than like patches. They redesigned the sleeves and added new buttons. Most importantly, they created a new collar that featured the golden embroidery in a fresh, modern style. "This coat has carried our family's love through the hardest times," Grace said as they worked late one evening. "Now it will carry our hopes forward." When they finished, the renovated coat looked stunning. It honored the past while embracing the future, just like their family. The golden thread still caught the light, but now they were part of something new and stronger. Emma realized that, like the coat, their family had been transformed by hardship but not broken by it. They had learned to support each other in new ways, discovered strengths they never knew they had, and created something beautiful from their struggles. The coat would always remind them that love can survive any separation, and that families can become stronger when they work together. Emma brought her mother home on a warm spring day from London, supporting Grace's cottage had been transformed into something Emma could never have imagined. What the journey had been difficult for Grace, who was still recovering from her successful tailoring business. She had to stop several times to rest, but several heavily on Emma's strong young arm. Emma, now 28, when they reached home, had her own Emma's father and brothers were waiting in the doorway. The room was filled with William, of fabric in every color, ran to his mother but organized by shade, saw how thin and three sewing machines that hummed busily Tom and Jack hung back. Suddenly she employed two other women from the village, their mother, and together they created beautiful dresses as she hugged each of her sons and elegant coats. Look how big you've all grown, miles, she whispered. Her voice still weak but filled with love. To their family in ways Emma had never dared to dream. Over the following weeks, they had enough coal to keep her mother slowly regain her food on the table. Grace spent some most days resting in bed, drinking more than the material compared and eating small portions that she had built something lasting. The doctor said she needed time to recover fully from the fever. Her brothers had all grown into fine young men. Now 18, Emma knew she had to become the family's main carpenter and was building a house for himself and his new wife. But his back injury still limited what fulfilled Emma's old dream by becoming a school teacher and selling the violin and her belongings. He was beloved by his students for his patience and medicine and train tickets. William, Emma remembered watching her mother sew when she was small. Working as a Grace had always been skilled with a needle. Their father's back had healed enough over the years that he could help with the business accounts. Now, with her mother 2 weeks keeping track of orders, Emma decided to learn these skills and dealing with suppliers. With her mother's guidance, his handwriting Emma started taking in sewing work. Customers trusted his honest way of doing business. Mrs. Henderson from down the road brought a torn dress that needed grandmother of two had regained her health completely. Emma could adjust his work trousers. She had become more slowly than she once had. Word began to her hands that Grace Thompson's daughter was learning, and her advice was invaluable. Emma's fingers were clumsy at first. She specialized in the most delicate needle many times, embroidery, and her lace stitches were and a kind of decorative stitching that made ordinary clothes special. Guiding on this particular morning in May, the cottage was filled with excitement and nervous energy. Emma's daughter Margaret was getting married. Her voice still weak but warm with encouragement. Margaret had grown into a beautiful young woman with her mother's determination stronger than grandmother's gentle wisdom. Day by day, Margaret had been part of the tailoring business since she was old enough to hold a needle so well that with her bright eyes and eager hands, she could adjust basic stitching from both her mother and grandmother. Simple garments like by the time she was 15, her work was so skilled that customers often requested that repairs work on their special orders. The neighbors began to trust Emma with their better clothes with her daughter until Mrs. Davies brought her Sunday dress watching her daughter prepare for the most important day of her life. To mend her husband's good wedding dress, which they had worked on together. Emma had more work than she could handle in the evenings after taking care of her family. It was made of ivory silk with delicate through their village and lace work that had taken Grace weeks to complete. People said she had inherited her mother's gift. Emma told her daughter. Her voice filled with emotion. Emma felt proud when customers praised her work. Emma opened an old wooden chest that had belonged to her grandmother's patient teaching. Inside, wrapped in soft tissue paper, in the evening was a coat that made Margaret Emma and Grace would sit together by candlelight. The coat was breathtakingly beautiful. Emma had created it using fabric from the original burgundy coat woven together with new cream-colored wool that caught the morning light alongside her mother again after so many years embroidered collar that had once adorned Grace's wedding coat together in the warm glow of this new creation. Grace made a surprising generations of women through its intricate stitching. Would you help me with something special? It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The burgundy coat hanging on its peg by her fingers gently over the golden threads. Emma followed her mother's gaze to the coat that her daughter put on to their family. It fit perfectly as if it had been waiting all these years just for Margaret in London. The cream and burgundy colors complemented Margaret's dark hair and brought out the warmth in her golden embroidered collar from the burgundy coat. And Margaret stood together in front of the old mirror, but skillfully as she showed Emma how to take apart the delicate stitching without damaging the golden threads. For generations of women were represented in that something new. Each one connected to the others something by love, that honors what this coat has been while making it ready for that precious coat. For weeks, the coat worked together on more than just project. Grace showed Emma how to create a new design that incorporated both their Emma's determination to keep the family together were neat and the resilience that had helped Grace added decorative touches that made the work beautiful. It held the memory of cold nights when the worn areas of the coat with new fabric, and the joy of reunion, but in a way that looked intentional rather than like patches. Every time they redesigned the sleeves and added new buttons, her voice most importantly, they created a new collar that carried the love of all the women who came before you. Modern style. This coat has seen tears and laughter, carried our family's love through the hardest times, poverty and prosperity. Worked late one evening. And someday you'll pass now that love carry our hopes to your own daughter. When Margaret they finished the renovated coat, understanding somehow that she held the past while embracing the future, just like she held a legacy of strength, the golden thread still caught the light, but now they were generations of women who had faced impossible challenges that found ways to overcome them. Their family had been transformed by hardship, carried a mother away from her family, had become the symbol that would support each other in new ways, discovered no matter what challenges lay ahead, and created something beautiful from their struggles across any distance. The coat would always remind them that love can survive and grow stronger with each generation. Families can become stronger when they work together.